Hi, welcome to the Toileting, Feeding, and Other Activities of Daily Living ADLs presentation. My name is Daisy Gomez, and I am an occupational therapy student from the University of Texas Medical Branch. If you have not already, please go ahead and fill out the pre-survey form before watching this video. I'm going to ask you this question. Do you know what activities of daily living, ADLs, are? What activities are considered ADLs? Go ahead and pause this video so you can think of your answer. Okay, activities of daily living are toileting, toothbrushing, dressing, hairbrushing, bathing, and feeding. These are all basically self-care, and a child can have problems in any one of these areas. So what might problems with ADLs or self-care look like? It might look like being unable to feed themselves independently, refuse to eat certain foods, have difficulty wearing certain clothes. So these two are sensory related problems. Being unable to coordinate movements to do the task. So like brushing their teeth or their hair. This is a motor issue. And then needing adult help to do them. And then also having limited motivation for independence and self-care. So they wait for an adult to do it for them. So these are just some examples, and this is an exhaustive list of examples. So why is OT important for self-care? It can increase independence for the child, increase their self-esteem, and increase their confidence, and it can decrease caregiver burnout. Okay, so these are the general interventions that can be done for any of the ADLs or self-care tasks that were listed earlier. So hairbrushing, brushing teeth, toileting, feeding, etc. So 1 would be developing gross and fine motor skills through play, 2, using visual supports, 3, using social stories, and 4, sensory integration therapy or sensory accommodations. So 4 would be if sensory processing issues are what's hindering the child from doing their self-care tasks. And if you haven't already, if you're interested in learning more about what sensory integration therapy is, please go ahead and check out that video. And of course, all of these interventions are individualized to the child's needs and preferences. Okay, so now we'll get into the details about what each intervention is. So visual supports. A visual support is a concrete cue that provides information about an activity, a routine, or an expectation. It provides consistent visual cues rather than transient verbal directions alone. It allows the child to rehearse expectations ahead of time. It can lessen anxiety, and it can provide consistency in instruction across all caregivers. And in the next slide, we will see an example of a visual support for self-care skills. Okay, so here is the visual support example. Here is one for toileting and then one for brushing teeth. So they provide each step of the process for toileting, and you can make these as detailed as you would like. If you needed to add more steps, you could. And yes, and then here's the one for toothbrushing. Okay, so here is another example of a visual for washing hands. So here we're using actual real life images of that process. So the first step would be to apply soap to your hands, and then you can do a nice little check mark there once you're done doing that step. Sensory. So if it's a sensory issue that's hindering the child from participating in one of their self-care activities, then an occupational therapist can provide sensory integration therapy for their specific sensory problem. They can provide a sensory diet that can be embedded into the daily routine to help with arousal levels. So say that toothbrushing is an anxiety-provoking activity for the child, then the occupational therapist can provide a sensory diet that provides calming input that can be done before and after brushing their teeth. So some interesting sensory strategies for self-care. There are vibrating toothbrushes, which the child might like the sensation of toothbrushing, or they might like the vibrating sensation of the toothbrush in their mouth. So they might be more agreeable to brushing their teeth. There is also a strategy where the child can desensitize their mouth with a vibrating chew toy before brushing their teeth. There are vibrating hairbrushes, which can be desensitizing just to feel the vibration on your scalp. For those that are aversive to hair brushing, and you can also provide scalp massages with your hands or a scalp massager before brushing the child's hair, just to see if that will make them more agreeable to hair brushing. And it's also recommended to count the number of strokes so the child knows when it will end. So for example, we'll do 5 strokes and then you can take a break. Okay, sensory friendly clothing. So Target currently has a sensory friendly line of clothes which are affordable. You can also make the environment sensory friendly. So when doing these self-care tasks, usually it's in a very brightly lit restroom. Well, maybe the child would be more comfortable being in a space where there's dim lights, there's minimal sound, the space is decluttered, it's not overwhelming to be in, and that can make it more appealing to the child. And providing them with comforting items too during that self-care activity. So if they have a particular soothing toy, just allow them to have that while participating in their self-care tasks. And another great sensory strategy is to provide proprioceptive input during self-care activities. So providing them with deep pressure via a weighted lap pad or a weighted vest for a calming effect. Okay, so now we'll learn about social stories. So they help individuals participate in and understand self-care tasks. Social stories are carefully crafted and they include descriptive, directive, perspective, and control sentences. They include pictures like illustrations or real life images. And there was a study done with children that have autism and the use of social stories, and they were successful at teaching children with ASD more steps in self-care tasks after the intervention. And these social stories were consistently read to the children on a daily basis and upon request by the child. So in the next slide, you'll see an example of what a social story looks like. So here is an example of a social story for toileting. It says, going pee in the potty is fun. If I go pee in the potty, that makes mommy and daddy happy too. When I need to go potty, I feel pressure in the bottom of my tummy. When I have to go to potty, I can tell mommy or daddy or my teacher. They will help me. First, I take off my pants and my underwear. So this is just 3 pages of a social story. It's much longer than this, and I have provided this story in the resources link in the description of the video if you're interested in using it. Now we will discuss toileting specifically. Okay, so when working with a child for toileting, the occupational therapist will consider all of these components. So they will consider the child's awareness. How is their sensory experience? Are they having any sensory problems with this task? What's their cognition like? What's their ability to manage their clothing like? Can they wash and dry their hands? So specifically, that would entail, what do their fine/gross motor skills look like? What about bilateral coordination, sequencing, executive functioning skills? Okay, next, motor skills. What does their sitting look like? Their balance, standing, grasping, wiping, cleaning, postural control. Can they do these things? Bowel movement. Could it possibly be a dietary issue that's going on, and that's what's stopping them from having a successful bowel movement? And the physical environment. Are there things we can do to adapt the environment or modify the environment to make it more accessible for the child? Okay, so here are some interventions. So a lot of it is the same from what we highlighted earlier. So using visual schedules, social stories, adapting the environment. So for example, that can look like adding a seat cushion to the toilet, providing them with a stool, reducing the lights and sounds in the restroom. In addition to that, we would do play-based activities to support development in areas of deficit. We can focus on reducing anxiety, addressing mobility and motor skills, sensory, of course. A really important thing to consider, and something that may often be overlooked, is posture. Posture is very important when going to the bathroom. So it's important for the child to have their muscles relaxed. So how can we help them relax their muscles? We can provide a stool to support their feet comfortably. So specifically, their knees should be slightly higher than their hips to help their muscles relax. They should lean forward with their arms rested on their knees, and they should say sh or grr instead of straining to help their muscles relax. They can also blow bubbles or blow through a straw to help with that muscle relaxation. What sensory specific environmental modifications can we do for them? So visually in the restroom, are the lights bright? Okay, so maybe we can dim the lights, we can use a dim lamp instead, or use sunglasses to dim out the bright lights. Visually, is the room super cluttery and there's things everywhere and it's distracting? Well, we can declutter the restroom and also make the experience a little more fun and relaxing, like blowing bubbles. You can blow bubbles, the child can blow bubbles, you both can take turns blowing bubbles, just something to make it fun in there. Okay, auditory. Is the sound of the toilet when it flushes, is it too loud? Well, you can provide them with noise canceling headphones. Olfactory, so smell. Are they sensitive to smells? Maybe you can use a instant odor eliminator spray, or you can use a preferred scent in the restroom. Okay, proprioception. So that is pressure. How can we apply pressure to them so they can feel relaxed? They can wear a weighted vest or have a weighted lap pad on their lap. Tactile. Okay, some kids really don't like the feeling of toilet paper. Sometimes it's just wet wipes can be cold, so you can use a wipe warmer to warm up the wet wipes so that they're not shocking. Okay, now we will discuss feeding. Okay, so feeding therapy can be very involved, and there are two different approaches to feeding, and these would be for kids that are picky eaters or they have food aversions. So the two approaches that are used are acceptance, exposure, independence, observation, and understanding, and sequential oral sensory or SOS approach. So these are two that I have heard of, but I'm sure there are other approaches as well. This type of feeding therapy requires additional training and certification. An OT or a speech therapist can do them, and generally these approaches include systematic desensitization. We will discuss that more in the next slide. These can be used for kids with autism that are having trouble with feeding, either because of sensory problems or they have food aversions, they're picky eaters. They can treat sensory aversions and improve oral motor skills, and they both encourage food exploration. So feeding will look like these approaches and plus any other things that we discussed earlier. So also maybe using social stories, using visual cues and stuff like that. Okay, so here are basic ideas for feeding. So earlier we talked about the systematic desensitization, and that is basically this right here. So it progresses from tolerating the presence of the food on a plate, and then it progresses all the way to finally chewing and swallowing the food. So it will follow that progression: tolerate, touch, smell, kiss, and so on. And then another basic idea for feeding is food chaining. So if your goal is to, for example, have a child eat a baked potato, you would first introduce them to a food that they really like, that's a French fry, and then you would progress it to a homemade French fry, a potato wedge, and then finally a baked potato. So this is just a technique that they would use to kind of warm up the child to accept, a target food that you want them to eat. Okay, so do you know anyone that may benefit from interventions for ADLs? What about for feeding and toileting? Okay, so thank you so much for watching this presentation. Please go ahead and fill out the post survey. And if you are interested in using or learning about any of the resources that I have for this lecture, go ahead and find the resources folder in the description. I have also made a video kind of reviewing what each resource looks like and how to use them. Okay, thank you for your time.